The Gospel of the Lord. As Christ says in the Gospel today, often the ways of God are beyond us, and sometimes God can hide the full meaning of the way that He works for us or works for us and reveals it later. That can be true in our personal lives. We may not understand something, see where God's leading us, and He does it deliberately so that we have to be humble and trust and follow. He can do that also for the church, and He can also do that in the way that He governs the entire cosmos. And continuing our little series of homilies that we've had over the last week, looking at the issues that we faced last year, especially with the vaccines, we come today to the topic of cooperation in evil, because that is very pertinent for the discernments that we face and all the complexity today of our lives, especially when it came last year, and it will continue to discernment of whether we can take a vaccine that has been tainted by cooperation in abortion and in the industry of abortion. And in order to look at this and to get a proper Catholic understanding and then make some proper conclusions, we need to go upstream and begin a bit at the beginning to look from a high perspective, so to speak. And there let's look at, first of all, God Himself. And then by looking at the way God governs the creation, we can see how that might, in a general way, give us light for the overall attitude in our whole life. As Christians, we're called to be in the world, but not of the world. So how do we be in the world that is broken and fallen and itself tainted by sin? And then that will give us light as to how we discern in our prudence the cooperation that we might have in institutions, our schools, universities, our workplaces, etc. And then it will give us light in the cooperation of how it affects personal actions in our daily lives. So let's start at the top with God Himself. God, as we know, is the source of the creation. He's all good and all true. Nothing, no darkness in Him, no evil at all in Him. He is never in any way the cause of any sin, which is turning away from Him. But indeed, God allows sin. When the devil and the angels that reject God rebel, God continues to hold them in being. It's an incredible fidelity on the part of God. He could have chosen, but He knew this from all eternity. He could have chosen to wipe them out as soon as they rejected Him and start again with some angels that He knew would be faithful to Him and follow Him. But even in their rebellion, and for the angels, it's an irrevocable choice. It's a choice that they make once for the rest of their existence. They're not like us because of the weakness of our body and our psychology. We can make a choice out of weakness, and God allows us the chance to repent, to come and go. For an angel, he sees entirely clearly in the eternal choice that he makes. And before the angels came in to see God face to face, He offered them all a choice. Some of them chose to serve and adore, others chose not to. But God, as they rebel, and for all eternity in their rebellion, God holds them in being. And there, at the fundamental level, in their being, the angels are good, because God has created them. Their active existence and their angelic life at its base level is good. But of course the angels then, in their angelic life, have turned themselves away from their origin and their end, God Himself, and there pervert themselves. The devils are the first perverts, as it were. They have turned away from their end in a definitive way. But the very fact that God is faithful and holding them in being, we see how God, in a unique way, is cooperating in evil, because He's holding them in existence whilst they commit sin. He provides the materials for their rebellion, which is their angelic nature. And in their angelic nature, they have an angelic intelligence, and they have an angelic will, and a freedom in their will, because they are rational persons. And there, God has provided the materials, spiritual materials, created elements, in which and from which they choose to rebel against Him. So God Himself, at a material level, creates things by which they rebel against Him, and there He is cooperating at a material level in the evil of sin. Shocking, scandalous, yes, but true. Does that mean that God is the source of evil, the cause of evil? Absolutely not. He allows that freedom and that choice against Him, and there it is only their choice which is the cause and source of the evil, but He has provided the elements, of course. And that's true also when it comes to human sin. God creates the bodies of Adam and Eve and infuses their spiritual souls, and from there they sin against Him. God has provided the created elements from which and in which they sin. And there that should give us some light, because sometimes in our Catholic life we have a misunderstanding that we think that the goal of our Catholic life is to remove ourselves entirely from any cooperation in evil in the world, and that is in fact an absurdity, an impossibility. And when we look at how God operates in His governance, in His providence, He holds the cosmos in being, and in that particular cosmos, as God is faithful to that act of creative existence, there is sin that is occurring. God is faithful and is providing the materials from which and in which the sin is occurring. And there, if God can do that, it raises a question for us. How might we operate in our human life, and then importantly in our Christian life, when it comes to evil in the world? Are we called as Christians to remove ourselves from every cooperation in evil, and thereby, as it were, live a kind of moral and religious purity that is far removed as much as we can? Or is there another wisdom at work in the call of God in a Christian life that we have to step into and understand? And then we look at the redemption, and the redemption that God gives us, that we believe in as Catholics. God Himself, the eternal light, the thrice holy God, is willing to enter a fallen, broken world, tainted as it is by evil, corrupted in various ways, wounded by sin. If God Himself descends into this world, the darkness, as it says, St. John says it, He comes down into the creation that's wounded in order to pick us up and take us to heaven. God Himself is willing in a general way to come very close to the elements of sin and those who commit sin. And we see this in the life of Christ, not only the descent into the world in the incarnation, but the way that God operates and Christ operates in His apostolic life. He will dine with sinners. He will be close to those who are far from God in order to bring them back, as we know Christ does. He goes in search of the lost sheep, and the lost sheep are often enmeshed in sin, in the dirtiness of evil in the world. And there that gives us another light about how God is not a kind of moral Puritan who, when sin occurs, wipes it out and starts again. He's willing to work with the wounded creation and then enter that wounded creation, from which and in which He will redeem it, pick that creation up, transform it, and hand it back to His Father. And that is the whole work of redemption, the new creation. And that should give us a light a little bit about how we are to operate. If we are to be emissaries of Christ, images of God, then we have to navigate in the same way that God does, in the way that we interact with evil in the world. And if God allows evil, as I've spoken about so many times, if God allows evil, sin, and then enters into this world of sin, it is in order to bring about an infinitely greater good, and that is the redemption of the world, the gift of Christ given, we receiving that and being translated into glory, infinitely greater goods. And that is why God, in his providence, in his wisdom, and in his mercy, allows evil, in order that he will bring forth from it an infinitely greater good. It's the only answer that can make any sense when we know that God is all-powerful and all good. Why does he allow evil? It is only because in his almightiness and in his goodness, he can draw forth from it greater blessings for us. Christ, in his life, is very imminent and close to sin. But there we can make a couple of distinctions, of course. We can certainly see that in the life of Jesus, when he interacts with Matthew the tax collector, or the woman caught in adultery, or when he's teaching Judas and any other sinners besides, he's never directly cooperating in the acts of their sins. He doesn't say to the woman caught in adultery, let me accompany you whilst you sin, and I will keep talking to you in the process of you sinning. He doesn't say to Matthew the tax collector, let me come and count the coins in your little office booth where you have taxed your brothers. And there Christ never participates in a direct way close to the sin of those that he's calling out of sin. He doesn't say to Judas Iscariot when Judas leaves the upper room to betray him, let me accompany you on your way to betray me. He never does that. He's calling them into a new life. He's willing to spend time with sinners, but he will never directly cooperate in the acts of sins themselves. They are on our shoulders when we are tempted by the devil, and we can use only our own will in that regard. That's important, just as a quick aside. When people speak of euthanasia today and think that we can accompany people right up to the point of them committing suicide and think that we're being an image of Christ by doing that, Christ never accompanied Judas as he went to betray him. He never accompanied anybody in the very direct process of committing sin. And that gives us another light on how we are called to live as Christians. My brothers and sisters, I'll stop there. It's very important as we move forward in discerning these things. We can see in our overall attitude to our human life that it's not the call of a Christian to be entirely removed from the evil of the world. That is a folly and is in fact a trick of the devil. You find in the ancient Gnostic groups, from the Greek word gnosis, it's the word for knowledge. There were ancient groups connected with Christianity also, who thought that there was one God who made the spiritual world who was good, one God who made the material world who was evil, and thereby the whole work of a human being to be saved in this kind of Gnostic idea is to come close to the good God who made the spiritual world, and by the enlightenment of a secret knowledge reach salvation. And the way that we reach salvation in this secret knowledge was by separating ourselves from the material world that had been made by the evil God. That's very much an old Manichaean Gnostic way of looking at the world. And so the Gnostics were often keen to try to minimize any contact with the material world because it meant contact with evil, contact with sin. And the way that salvation occurred was by becoming more and more spiritual, more and more entering into a liberating secret knowledge. And there, my brothers and sisters, sometimes Christians have this idea that the body is somehow evil. I must get rid of all contact with the material world because it's somehow evil. All the desires of my body are somehow evil. And this is in fact a doctrine from the devil. You find in the worst of those kinds of religious groups that they commit suicide because they cannot cope with this truth of having to live in a world that's fallen and marked and tainted by sin. And there it is the devil, because the devil hates the material world. He hates the fact that God has created matter, and he leads and tries to lead men into a wrong thinking on that. And sometimes you find Catholics in that very thinking today, when they look around at the broken culture, and think that we can have nothing to do with all the different mechanisms of our time and we must separate ourselves entirely. That is not Christian. I will continue tomorrow to look a bit more, on Monday, with the different ways in which we have to discern the way we might cooperate in a more practical life, and then we discern in our personal acts. And the use of a vaccine is in the personal acts of how we look at our cooperation in evil and whether it's legitimate or not. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.